My name is Father Terence Curley, and I'm very happy to be with you. And we're doing this YouTube really as a compliment to many of the works I've done, especially with the the Brothers of Society of St. Paul. We've done a number of videos over the years. I was trying to think recently in talking with them just how long it's been, and we came up with over 20 years. So that's a long time to be working in grief ministry. And the videos certainly are very helpful in terms of helping people to cope and to find meaning and to fulfill their needs. And I also wrote a book recently called entitled The Challenge in the Landscape of Loss, Why What We've Been Told About Grief Doesn't Help. That's a rather interesting title, and I certainly will get to that. Maybe a little bit more about myself might help, just to introduce myself to you if you don't already know who I am. And I am a priest, as I said, in Boston. I've been a pastor, and I teach at the Theological Institute for St. John's Seminary, and I've been teaching courses there for well over 10 years, and I've gone through a number of courses with a number of students in the lay ecclesial ministry, which I think is really so necessary for the life of the church. You know about the document Co-workers in the Vineyard, and so my role is to help with ministry as a faculty member, but also to give insights as to what is really occurring in ministry. Back in 1990, I went to Boston University and received my doctorate in ministry, and I wrote a dissertation. And the dissertation then was on the order of Christian funerals and the needs of the bereaved. Since then, an awful lot has happened, and I've really grown with the topic in such a way that I realize now that a considerable amount of changes have occurred. New research has occurred since I wrote my doctorate, and it certainly has changed the landscape of loss in many ways. Our understanding about grief has changed considerably. When I was teaching at Lesley University before I taught at St. John's, we talked about the experiences of loss and what people go through, and we talked about phases and steps. But now it's even gone further than that. We don't really grieve that way. And what I'd like to do in the YouTubes, which, as I said, complement a much deeper approach with the books and with the DVDs, what I'd like to do is give you a little snapshot of what grief ministry is really like, and now with the changes that have happened in a new landscape. And we have to challenge a lot of the older thoughts that we had. So many times you've had people talk to us, and when we lose someone that we love or lose anything really, what they talk to us about is how we have to let go and move on and reinvest in closure. And that really isn't the language of loss. If anything, those terms don't help us. But yet, this is what's been the predominant or the dominant model that really has existed for quite some time, and it's existed since really about 1917. So what we have in our country is a Euro-American model. But the Euro-American model doesn't really meet the needs of the bereaved, and we're finding that out. We're finding out, the researchers found that out. The researchers like George Bonanno and Robert Niemeyer have done extensive research, and others too, many others. And around 1996, there was a wonderful study done in Boston at the Massachusetts General Hospital with the Harvard Medical School. And the researchers found out that what they thought in talking to bereaved parents and children, that what they thought was that something was really different from what they were taught. They found out that the standard models, or the dominant model, that always says that the end of grief, or the goal for grief, is to disengage, to let go, to move on, to reinvest, wasn't really what they found out in the research and modern research and the way that interview. They found out that young people were struggling and parents were struggling to maintain a bond. And that's what we struggle with too with grief. You know, how do I really understand my new relationship, and what I would say certainly as a priest, my new relationship in faith? I believe that this topic is so very important for the life of our faith because it's compatible with what we believe in as a church. We believe in eternal life. We believe we're on the threshold of the kingdom of heaven. And we believe that those who go before us in faith are in the kingdom, and that we have an ongoing dialogue with them. And that's what they came up with, really, the term enduring bond or continuing bond. And that's what we have. It's not severed. It's not all of a sudden ended. But unfortunately, in our secular society, what we've had happen is there's been an approach to grief that's purely psychological. But the new approach is far from all of that. It includes much more than it excludes. In the older approaches of the standard theories that we had, it was very individualistic. And it was based on really Sigmund Freud back in 1917, when Sigmund Freud coined the term the work of grief. And from that term developed all these theories. There weren't the interviews to back it up. That's the problem. And so we found out in later times that from Freud, all right, and saying that the work of grief is not a theory that is really viable for us. And others have come along. There have been John Bowlby and a number of them talking about attachment and detachment. Well, detachment doesn't really belong with grief because we still have that continual bond. We have that relationship in love. And we have to redefine ourselves with a new relationship and the new ways of understanding our world. The world that we assume, all of us assume this, I assume it. We assume that everything's going to be the same. And then all of a sudden we experience a loss. It could be an extreme loss or it may be a mild loss, but the world changes. Our worldview changes and we feel shattered very often. Similar to the words of the psalmist, we're like a shattered vase. Our lives are so different. And are we really equipped to handle that? Well, we probably are much more equipped than we ever thought. The new research says that we are hardwired, that we have a resiliency, that we're stronger than we believe. I like to put it into the context of faith and say that we have the grace, we have the strength that's given to us, and we can do more than we even thought we can, with God's help. If I were to put in all of the thoughts that I have in the writing I've done and the ministry I've done for close to 30 years, really, what I would say is that, in a simple sentence, all I've really tried to do with God's help is to place our loss into the context of faith. And in my DVDs especially, and in the book, I offer a ministry toolbox, or a toolbox. The ministry toolbox can be for those who minister and meet with the bereaved. It can also be for the bereaved, because what resources do we rely on? Because the goal of grief is not to disengage. The goal for grief is to find meaning, and to find meaning that gives us comfort and consolation and gives us hope. So it's to reconstruct meaning in our lives. Yes, we are shattered, and we can talk about that in another YouTube, as I do in all of my DVDs. How do we really process the grief that we have? How do we go through grief? And how do we find meaning? And there are ways in the new approaches that I think are much more powerful and much more meaningful and much more accurate. Because what we were doing was superimposing upon the bereaved what the theory said. If you didn't follow a certain theory, you didn't follow the task, if you felt that you still have a communication with those whom you love and you wanted to talk to them, then that was considered something that was really a problem. And even to the extreme, some counselors would say, well, that's really pathological because you can't let go and you can't reinvest. Well, it isn't that way. Reinvesting is for Wall Street. Reinvesting is a term that doesn't apply here. Detaching doesn't apply. It may work with some of the attachment theories for childhood and mothers and children and the bond, but in the long run, when we look at detachment, it doesn't apply to grief because that bond continues. And that's what I really want to talk to you about, is that one size doesn't fit all, and that there are new models and there are new ways of approaching grief. And that's what we really have to do if we really want to find meaning, if we want to be able to, I hate to use the word cope, but we want to be able to in our struggle, cope and find hope in our lives. That's what it's really all about. And it's about a search for a new world view, a new way of looking at life, a new way of grieving. that really will help us to redefine ourselves, to redefine our relationship, and to redefine the hopes and the dreams that we have. And certainly, I think all of this and the new models that we have in the new psychology of loss are much more healing and much more compatible with our faith.